Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Castlevania Circle of the Moon. In the last part we used our newly obtained Rockwing to pretty much re-adventure across the entire castle, finding many stat max up items and DSS cards along the way. And now we're going to continue doing just that actually before finally heading off to the main destination that the Rockwing allows us to access, which is the next proper area of the castle. First off though, we're heading back to the room we first fought Cerberus in, as there's a new enemy here now, the final of the three variants of the Scary Candle. This is the Trick Candle. Same strategy we used on the Scary Candle applies here. Have the stopwatch to stop time so you can whittle through their 400 HP before they actively fade away after a few seconds. This enemy only spawns after defeating Camilla in the underground waterway, and like their cousins back in the Machine Tower, we're here for their rare drop, though this specific enemy's common drop is the Heart Mega at a 0.5% drop rate at base. Let the fact that's their common drop really bode poorly for what we're about to see here. Before I talk about what their rare drop is, worth noting, this happened along the way while I was farming them. The enemy stopped spawning in, and any candle that wasn't immediately near the entrance of an area was actively out by default. I don't know what happened here too much. I'm assuming I did something to the game's memory from entering that room over and over again, killing the Trick Candle, but it thankfully fixed itself upon resetting the game after a save. Notably, it took me 54 or so Trick Candles to actively get the second drop to show up, the next DSS card, and the rarest one in the game, the Pluto card. This drops from Trick Candles at a 0.4% drop rate at base, which is really low, even with my current luck. That's about a 1.25% chance, if my calculations are correct. It's far from the rarest drop in the game in total. We've already talked about some that are 0.2% or below in some cases, but it's definitely the lowest that you're going to be farming any kind of practically if you're going for a normal meaning of 100%. As for the Pluto card, its effects don't follow a set theme. It's more a wild card of sorts. The Salamander combo, for instance, allows you to use the same half-circle motion that causes you to use the summons or throw the bombs with those other notable action cards to use your equipped sub-weapons, Item Crash. Grand Cross, Thousand Daggers, Hydro Storm, the usual suspects are back. What's notable about this, though, is that the stopwatch Item Crash is what you need to reliably kill the Skeleton Medalist we showed off last part, should you want that Bear Ring rare drop, as hard as it is to actively get to proc. The Serpent combo actively throws out two of your equipped sub-weapon at a time at the same hard cost of only one of them, plus a little MP. The Mandragora combo increases the EXP yield from enemies by 20% while it's active. The Golem combo gives you a Shadow Clone that's placed a few steps ahead of you, which mimics your actions to a T, be it attacks or sub-weapons. The Cockatrice combo increases your defense the longer you've played at a rate of 1 defense point per 6 minutes of playtime. Meaning at my current game time, it would boost my defense by about 45 points or so. And jumping ahead a few cards here, the Thunderbird combo is the same effect for your attack stat. If you leave your game running while working on some other things, or overnight while you're sleeping, this would be a very easy, albeit very inefficient way compared to the game's length of actively boosting your stats up. The Pluto Manticore combo is actively one of my favorites in the game though, as it makes it so that sub-weapons cost MP to use rather than hearts until you've run out of MP. This can be costly depending on your level or even what gameplay mode you're playing on, as it costs 5 MP per heart that would normally have been used up. That means even using the stopwatch once like that costs 100 MP. And worth noting, this late in the game, I only have about 800, so I can only do that 8 times in a row. Which admittedly is still pretty good because of how good your MP regeneration can get depending on your intellect stat, but it can be a bit of a mixed bag. Finally, for the moment, the Griffin combo with Pluto boosts your walking and running speed a pretty good bit actively. It's really nice for this late in the game when you're trying to get from one place to another on a first run. But with how much else I want to try and get done, I have other goals along the way. For the moment, though, we're speeding up as I go back through the castle once again to get the crossbow range, just because I want to have that for stuff coming up. But our next destination is actively the left room of the outer wall, because the next area we need to access is at the direct top of the map, and the only pathway that takes us there is through said room. We do have one quick pit stop along the way, though, namely, at the very top right of this room, there's actively another door we haven't been in yet that has another stat max up for us. We've been able to actively grab this as well since we got the tackle shoulder pad after the Necromancer fight. I just never grabbed it before now because we were seldom in this direction, or at least in this specific room where I would have a convenient time to grab it, until right now. Sort of planned, sort of not, it just kind of worked out decently at the end of the day, really. Worth noting along the way, though, while there are a few more DSS cards left for us to discover, the Pluto combos round out the ones I use any kind of regularly. MP-based sub-weapons, doubled-up sub-weapons, or boosting your luck, strength, and defense are what I tend to use the most, especially if it's the combos that boost your defense or strength based on how much of the map you've explored. I seldom go outside my comfort zone there on a normal playthrough, but Magician mode can change that up, and it largely just has to do with either how comparatively situational some of the DSS combos are, or more often than not, just how late in the adventure you actively are first able to obtain some of the cards. The Pluto card especially, because by the time you defeat Camilla, you're at probably maybe the 80 to 85% mark of just the main campaign, even if that's not how much of the map you've explored by that point. In either case, we're actively now in the very left room of the outer wall, and if we use the Rockwing to ascend to the top left corner of this room, we can find the main entrance to our next region of the castle, and one of the more dangerous ones at large. Welcome to the Observation Tower, which has one of my favorite renditions of the Vampire Killer theme across the entire series. Not for nothing, pretty much every rendition of this song that's present on the Game Boy Advance, even if some of them are more well hidden, like the one in Harmony of Dissonance, are generally just really good versions of the song. Mind you, not for nothing, out of the, I'm gonna say 5 key songs across the franchise that are like the Belmont themes between Vampire Killer, Bloody Tears, Beginning, Simon's theme from Castlevania 4, and Rondo of Blood's Divine Bloodlines, I don't think there's really a bad version of any of these songs. I think with Vampire Killer in specific, the only version of the song I've heard that I'm not a fan of is, outside of maybe one of the ones from the arcade game that I just remembered existed, I think one of the various old PC versions of Castlevania 1 had a very lackluster version of it. But if memory serves, that was a PC in specific back in the 80s or early 90s that just didn't have much of a sound card to begin with. Future me, see if you can go find exactly what version of the song I'm talking about even. The Observation Tower has some of the most powerful enemies in the game, but it also has some of the best farming locations in the game. This room right here actively has like 8 wind armors in it in specific. Now you might remember, I mentioned wind armors can drop potions or potion highs. That makes this one of the 2 best rooms in the game to farm up healing items. It's either this or the room we first found a wind armor in on the far end of the underground waterway. There's only one of them in there as opposed to like 8 in here, but you can get in and out of that room a lot more quickly ultimately, so it's really just a matter of whether or not your luck kicks in to make the drops happen faster. We actively will be farming those items in the relatively near future as well. One of like 4 distinct farms in a row even, but I'll talk more about that next part, I believe, is when we do that. Also useful for that is that the Observation Tower has several of the Legion enemies we first saw on our way over to the battle arena on the northeast side of the castle last time. They can also drop potion highs, so hey, you can actively go back and forth between killing the 8 or so wind armors in here and the 6 to 8 legions in the previous room, and just hope you get a lot of drops along the way. You might not, you might, it really just depends on your luck. There is one particular note about the Observation Tower that is kind of nasty, and it kind of ties into how the underground waterway played out as well. Save points are sparse here. Even sparser in my eyes than the underground waterway, because the underground waterway doesn't have that many rooms, but it does have 2 save points tied to it. The Observation Tower only has 1 save point, and we're only about a room and a half away from it at the moment. So you can get all the way up to where the boss fight is after fighting through some very powerful enemies and just not have a proper way to restore your health. Sort of. There is one way to get around that, kind of. But whether or not that actively helps you or not depends on the player and your playstyle, I'd say, in general. This room's got 2 new enemies, though both are reskins of what we've seen prior. We have Evil Pillars, stronger variants of the Demon Towers from the Audience Chambers, and Minotaurs, which are technically the main variant of the Werehorse enemy we saw last time with the same gigantic shockwave, frankly. That's very easy to get off-screened by depending on how quickly you're moving through an area, by the way. The Evil Pillar actively has a decent chance of dropping a steel armor for you, which actively will boost Nathan's defense by 120, which, depending on what armors you found thus far, can be a nice upgrade. They don't have a worthwhile rare drop, though. Their rare drop is the same toy ring that was the Skeleton Medalist's common drop, which, as we mentioned then, does absolutely nothing. The Minotaurs, on the other hand, have a decent 1.5% chance at base to drop the Golem card as their common drop. So if you didn't get that yet, not the worst option here, outside of just how big their attacks are. Their rare drop, though, is some spiced meat at a 0.75% chance at base. As we brought up earlier, that's a decent HP restorative, but it's comparatively a lot rarer than even your base potions or potion highs. So while I do later on try to actively farm some spiced meats, I'd say it's more worth your time to try and farm potion and potion highs from especially the wind armors if you need HP restorative items. It's just a better use of your time and experience, I'd say. What's also kind of funny about specifically the room above us right now is that a lot of the Evil Pillars are there as well. And not for nothing, the Evil Pillars, I'd say in general, have a higher chance of actively dealing damage to you with their projectiles than the Demon Towers did back in the Audience Chamber. If only because there's times, especially in the next room, where the evil pillars will see you through a wall and just try to snipe you from there. So if you're rushing a little bit or getting distracted by other enemies, it's very easy to take some very silly damage there. But at least not for nothing, if you get to this room, you're right next to where the save point is for this region, so at least you can recover that HP pretty quickly. There are some rooms in this specific area, though, that I would call rather crowded, because they have, frankly, way more enemies per capita than most of the other rooms in the game do. But I get why, because this is technically the final area of the game, technically. This isn't where the final boss is, but if you don't do the battle arena, this is the last area in the game you explore. So if you get to this area and find it to be a bit of a difficulty spike in some regards, if you look at it through that lens, it makes a little more sense, and even that it's nowhere near the most extreme difficulty spike in the series when it comes to things like that. Mind you, in general, kind of hard to top American Castlevania 3 in that regard, where a simple Medusa head just does like a third of your health in the final level, because damage in that version of the game is based on the level you're in and not what the enemy itself is, which is just wrong feeling, frankly. I've always found the Simon stained glass windows in this area weird. I don't know why. Maybe it's just such a bizarre splash of color compared to everything else in this region, but something about it's always just kind of stood out weirdly to me. But honestly, not for nothing on that topic, Circle of the Moon is actually a very visually impressive game to me for the time this came out. Which, now that I think about it, that's actually something I haven't talked about yet in the LP for some reason. Circle of the Moon was actively a launch title for the Game Boy Advance. And I don't mean like launch era like a lot of quote-unquote launch titles technically are. Circle of the Moon was released the same day as the Game Boy Advance in all territories, so no matter what, you actively had access to this game. And honestly, out of the launch lineup across all territories, and out of the American launch titles at least, I think it's probably the game I put either the most time into or the second most time into, because I did play Super Mario Advance a lot on my GBA growing up. It's probably the way I played Super Mario Bros. 2 the most overall. The only real fold there, quote-unquote, is that there was one specific game that was a launch title for the GBA in Japan, but was only first year of the GBA here in the West. Specifically, Mega Man Battle Network 1 was day and date as well with the GBA in Japan. Meanwhile, we didn't get that until October, which I think was 3 or 4 months after the GBA's release in the West period. And while Battle Network 1 is definitely the Battle Network I've put the least time into over the years, I've still put more time into that than I have into Circle of the Moon at large, as well as Super Mario Advance, because it's a Mega Man RPG. Of course I'm going to do that. Not for nothing, I am the type of Mega Man fan that, even the RPGs in that franchise I'm not the biggest fan of, I've played upwards of 4 times plus each, because I'm just like, I need a hit of Mega Man. Sure, this really unhealthy super fried chicken will do. Yeah, I need that trash again. Going back to the game we're actively playing, though, the next room in specific is actually a very good place to farm out either a very good armor for yourself, or the Thunderbird DSS card, in the case you haven't grabbed that yet. Specifically, it's time for us to see an old friend that has been in most of the games in the series at this point, really. In this next room is the reoccurring Dullahan enemy, which in this game's case will just charge left and right trying to ram into you. Their rare drop is the Thunderbird card at a 1.4% chance at base, which is 0.3% higher than the Werepanther's drop rate for it back at the Chapel Tower, so they are a little more reliable for it than that. But their common drop at a 2% base drop rate is the Platinum Armor, which will actively boost Nathan's defense by 150. Much more worthwhile than the Steel Armor you can pretty often get from the Evil Pillars in this area. It's just a factor of whether or not you get it quickly or not. When I was actively doing the test run for this playthrough, I got one from the first Dullahan I killed, and while it didn't stay on me for the rest of the game, it definitely carried me through the next good chunk pretty easily. At this point, though, I might as well talk about this because the game in question does have a good bit of Castlevania DNA in it, but Mina the Hollow were actively just released at the time of recording. The next game by Shovel Knight developer Yacht Club Games. I'm somewhere between probably 65 and 80% done with it, I think. I've lit 5 generators to give a good impression there. I can see why some people are complaining about some parts of it, specifically some of the difficulty stuff and how many gimmicks are in a given area, but everything it does challenges me in just the right ways and rewards my absurd sense of exploration in just the right way that it kind of makes me feel like the one panel from that one Junji Ito horror manga where it's like, this is my hole, it was made for me, and I've adored it so far. I'll probably do an LP of it at some point down the line after a few years, maybe after some updates, just because my list is already so in-depth and all that. It's been great so far. We got 2 new enemies in here, the Alron and the Demon Lord. The Demon Lord is the final variant of the Beast Demon and Arc Demon archetype we've seen a couple of times. They do have some nice drops, though. Specifically, they can either drop the basic potion item at a 2% base drop rate, but their rare drop at a 1% base drop rate is the Strength Armband item, which is the strength variant of the Gambler Armband and Defense Armband we've talked about already. Boosts your strength by 100, lowers your other stats by 25. If you can get both one of those in the Defense Armband, that's honestly a really good build to run in endgame, though there are better builds. The fact that I got one actually made me very torn because I actively have 2 accessories in mind to grab in this region, and neither of them are the Strength Armband. So it's just like, well, enjoy your space in the bag. The Elrond, though, is interesting. They stay in place and just send their vines up in the air to damage you. And not for nothing, finding a safe spot there can be kind of rough. But they have a pretty interesting drop. For one thing, their common drop is the magic robot, and we talked about with the witches back in the Underground Waterway. Boosts your defense by 200 and your int by 300. Really decent endgame item if you prefer casting overall. But the big thing they have is their rare drop, a Potion EX at a remarkably low 0.5% base drop rate. That is a full HP recovery. It's effectively an elixir. If you can grab one of those, hold on to it for extreme emergencies because it can really save your ass. The Dark Armors, though, are the enemy I'm really looking to farm here. Their attacks are a lot like the armors we saw back in the Underground Warehouse, where they'll point their sword either straight forward, down, or upwards, and they'll fire a slight shockwave forward that you need to either jump over or duck under, depending on altitude. Their common drop is the Platinum Armor we just talked about at a 2% base drop rate, so also decent to farm them for that. But it's their rare drop I'm after at a 1% base drop rate. And I'm actively going to farm a specific Dark Armor for that rare drop because there's actively a hidden room off to the right wall here at one of these altitudes that just has a Dark Armor in there. If memory serves, I farm about 30 Dark Armors in total here, but I actively get one sooner than 30. The thing is about the rare drop is that it's an item called the Double Grips, which is an accessory. But in order for the Double Grips to actively activate, well, their name is pretty literal, you need 2 of them, which means you need to farm 2 of the drop. Which, depending on your luck or your active literal luck stat, can take a little bit, but trust me, the farm is worth it. The effect that the Double Grips take by equipping 2 of them is that it boosts all 4 of your main stats by 75. Which means you effectively get triple the effect of having 2 star bracelets equipped without any of the drawbacks of having, say, the Defense Armband or Strength Armband on. It is worth it. While there are definitely better accessory setups for individual stats that you might want to focus on, like strength or defense, for an overall toolkit build that works for pretty much anything, the Double Grips, I think, are overall your best option in the game for accessories. Armor, your mileage may vary depending on whether or not you want to focus on intelligence or just get your defense as cranked up as it can be, though there is noticeably one distinct armor that is far and away the best. Now, there is actively 3 other exits to this room we're in right now. One of them leads to the boss fight, one of them leads down a small path towards a stat max up, but there's a 3rd pathway I'm not going to enter until after the boss fight. With that said, your mileage may vary on whether or not you want to do that now or later, because there is a room in here that can be a nice boon to grab before the boss fight, but I prefer to do that after the boss so I can make a cleaner escape from the area with the damage I've taken from the boss in tow. Again, your mileage may vary. I prefer to do it after, but I can see a lot of reasons to do before the boss, not for nothing. Especially if you don't either figure out or hear about a specific strategy for the upcoming boss fight. That, frankly, makes them a bit of a joke, albeit it definitely makes the fight quite a bit longer in comparison to if you're a lot more aggressive. Now, I've already mentioned that we're coming up on the end of the game. If there is one thing I've noticed over my years with the Metroidvania Castlevanias, is that in a lot of them, the end can kind of sneak up on you unless you're keeping a really close eye on the map exploration percentage. I think the only games in this style that truly feel like they have the ending led into properly is Symphony, even though the last third of that game is definitely still kind of stretched out in some regards. Aria, I think, gets properly led into. Ecclesia gets properly led into, as does Portrait, I'd say. Harmony, Circle, and Dawn definitely are a little bit weaker in that front. Mind you, in general, I'd say they're the weakest entries in the series to begin with in this genre, even outside of their story representations. In either case, we're coming up on the boss fight, and depending on your experience level, I would really recommend using whatever healing items you have ahead of time, because this fight can damage you pretty easily if you're not careful. Let's see who we got. Nathan, so you finally arrived. Hugh, you're okay? I thought that they... Hugh, what are you doing? I'm superior to you. I will defeat you to prove myself to Father. You're being controlled by Camilla? No, by Dracula. Boss of the observation tower is Hugh himself, and he can be pretty rough if you don't realize one specific thing about his scripting. The moment you're directly in front of him, he tries to swipe with his sword. So if you just stand right in front of him, dodge out of the way slightly by moving left or right or jumping, and then attack him, you can get him in a bit of an attack lock where he won't use too much of what else he actively has. Otherwise, he can use his own version of most of the game's sub-weapons, the only outlier really being the stopwatch. He can throw them out pretty quickly too, so if you're not baiting out the sword strikes, you might want to stick to a mid-range distance to react as best as you can to them being thrown out. He can do a decently fast dashing slash from one side of this screen to the other, but you can just simply dodge over that. He can set his sword on fire and do a bit of a larger slash, and he also has a stab downwards into the ground that puts fire towers in both directions next to him, if memory serves. The real upset is about towards the latter half or third of his health bar, where he'll raise up into the sky and power up like so. At this point, he throws two of his sub-weapons at any point in time. He uses them identically to our newly acquired Pluto Serpent DSS combo. He also gains what's effectively Virgil's Summon Swords ability from Devil May Cry, where he'll summon 8 spectral swords that try to home in on you. Every single one of them that touches you saps some of your HP away into his own health pool, so don't let that hit you too often if you're willing to have a short fight here. Hugh might look pretty easy because I am cheesing the ever-living hell out of his scripting, but if you don't do this, you'd be surprised by how quickly he can tack on the damage between how fast his attacks can come out, as well as just how much damage he can do to you outright, especially if you're not a very high level, or if you have much worse armors equipped, depending on the situation. This is one of the other reasons I farm up DSS as best I can, because in the case a boss actively decides to get aggressive, I can have a much easier time handling them in the long term. There's the Summon Swords attack, by the way. You can either just try to dodge them, because they do eventually stop homing in on you, but you can also just destroy them with your physical attacks or sub-weapons if you place them correctly. And he's down. Stop, Hugh! I don't want to hurt you. Hugh! Nathan. I'm alright now. You're yourself again. Nathan, I'm sorry. I was envious of you. Huh? When Father named you the successor, I was afraid that I was worthless. I needed the recognition. Enough. That probably was the dark weakness that Father saw. In my soul. Why he chose you. Stop it, Hugh. It's alright. Even I realize now that Father was right in his decision. Don't make me embarrass myself further. Allow me to self-pity for now. Help Father now. I'm entrusting his return to you. I accept. Before we leave the room, I do want to make sure we grab the last little bit of the map by getting the top left and right corners. And beyond Hugh lies our last key pickup in the game, and this one is very literal, as the item here is the last key. Key to open the door to where the right will take place. We can now access the final boss against Dracula. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 11, we're not doing that exact thing I just said because there's one more area for us to take a look at, isn't there? See you guys then.